Okay, so hello Facebook. This is Trish again, doing my monthly poetry challenge for National Poetry Month, April. And I'm going to talk a little bit more here than instead of just reading the poem because it's a Sunday, and while it's not a lazy Sunday because I have a lot to do, it's lazier than other days of the week. So I want to talk a little bit about my poetry in general. Also, I need to find a phone stand because I still can't get either of my computers to actually do a live thing. Anyway, so hi Chris, hi Paul. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the type of poetry I write. I started writing poetry because it was a way to deal with complicated thoughts and feelings. Things that prose didn't completely cover. So using the lines, the punctuation, the extra dimension that poetry gives for an idea allowed me to play more with stuff that I had mixed feelings about, that were absolutely not black and white, that weren't even like the same shade of gray, like marble, where you've got some parts that are black mixed with white, mixed with a gazillion shades of gray. So when I first started writing poetry, I wrote a lot about religion, faith, Catholicism, because there was a lot of things that bothered me about that. There was a lot of really good parts that I had growing up, and also a lot of really difficult and wrong pieces to that. So I started using poetry to examine my thoughts and come to my conclusions about faith and religion. And then, hi Stephanie, I started doing the similar with feminism because I call myself a feminist. I am definitely a feminist, but there are issues with feminism that I have to acknowledge and deal with to be the truest person that I can. So I started writing what I call my angry feminist poetry, but also it's more like complicated feelings on feminism poetry, though most of the poems end up sounding angry and have a beat feel to them. I grew up reading fantasy and science fiction and horror and genre work. So I also started writing poems in the vein of that because it was such an important part of my growing up, shaping morals and thoughts, how I interacted with people, how I defined the world around me. And like everything else, if you look at it closely, there are still plenty of issues in fantasy, especially the fantasy when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s. There was a lot of issues with how one defined themselves, about representation, and also troubling thoughts about what it meant to be a hero and all of that. The fourth type of poetry that I ended up writing, because it falls mostly into four categories at this point, soon to be five, because I have a lot on medical and ADD. But the fourth main type of poetry that I started looking at was what I shared yesterday, which was iced tea. And that is a look at simple things that deserve more of a complex, things we take for granted, that I wanted to draw attention to the beauty of their complexity as well as their simplicity. So those are like the four main, which is like, again, my Casualties of Grace, which I have that all together. I call it the Bitter Cup of the Grail, because that's a fancy name for complicated feminism. I have my epic, no less than epic, because there's issues with epic on that. And then my Simple Beauty poems. And this, for the past month, since I also started taking ADD ADHD medication, I chronicled that with a poem a day, which I've kept up with. And I'm also proud I've kept up a whole week doing live broadcasts on Facebook of my poetry. So, and some of the poems I've shared are not entirely finished. So those are like now five types of poetry, and that's what I read. A lot of these, one of the challenges with sharing this with you guys is that a lot of it is problematic. A lot of it is painful. And I'm thinking, people are watching me read this who might recognize things or who might be hurt that I find complications and problems with things they love, like their faith, like feminism, like fantasy. And I hate dealing with like this sort of like flashback and rollback on that. But to me, I need to be honest. So choosing which poems I want to share has actually been the hardest part to doing this, as opposed to remembering to actually go on live every day. So choosing the poems that I think people will appreciate the most, that I feel are the truest, and the ones whether or not I want to deal with people who may or may not be offended by some of the poems, because there will be some, and I'll put little trigger warnings on them, and, NSFW if I'm dropping the F-bomb a lot. So those ones I'll give warnings for, and those are the hardest for me to share, but I will eventually do them. I'm working my way up. So today's poem is a hard one to share because it's a difficult poem. It's not a happy poem at all. It's called The Hero's Journey, a Tragedy. And it's my exploration of what it means to be a hero. And it's not just in fantasy literature or any literature, because there's lots of heroes beyond the genres. But it's also what it's like to be a hero, our veterans, people who serve, people who go out and risk their lives. And what happens because they do it again and again, and there's only so many heroes, and if things need to get done, it's the heroes that have to keep doing it, and what the price is that people pay to be a hero. So that's where I came from with this poem. So it's not a happy poem, but I really like it because it's an exploration of what the hero's journey in general is. So The Hero's Journey, a Tragedy. This is also a longer poem. You trade the sacrifice of innocence for the sacrifice of innocence, yours, that others may enjoy their ignorance. Husband, wife, children, a simple life, unaware, or at best barely aware of the constant flux, the constant struggle, balancing bad for good, profane with sacred. Neither can win, or everything ends. Motion is constant. War begets change. Death begets life. Sacrifice, the beneficence of the gods, or whoever the hell is in charge. And you are called again, to protect, to love those who can never give a fraction of your love back. Another dragon threat, another stop-loss. Leave your lover, or take your lover, only to know this burden is shared but lightened for neither. Leave your wife, leave your husband, leave your partner, leave your parents, leave your children, again. And pray your children are not heroes. Let them be princes and princesses, dancing and spoiled, but not heroes. For a hero has a choice: pay destiny's price, or bear fate's torture. She, born a hero, cannot bear others suffer in her place, so she goes again. He that is a hero cannot sit still, allow, and he is called again. And the wife is trampled, and the husband is raped, and the children, while not slain, betrayed, abandoned, bitter. The only ones not singing songs of the hero's glory, for the better. They shouldn't have to know. You bear those scars too. Because you are a hero, and that is all you can be. Pray your children need never be heroes. So that is The Hero's Journey, a Tragedy. I hope you enjoyed it, even though it was dark and a little sad. A lot sad. But that's one of my poems playing with fantasy and the genre and the reality of people who have to be heroes. Thank you guys for watching, and happy Sunday, and I hope you guys all have a great week. Thank you for joining me, and take care. Thank you. Bye.